of interviews with candidates for state constitutional offices. And Margie, give us a quick rundown on who we're going to have in the next couple of weeks.
Well, let me start out by saying who we already had. On February 13th, we had Adam Edlin, of course, who is Democratic candidate for governor. On March 6th, this last week, we had Chris Toby, who's a Democratic candidate for auditor. Today, we're privileged to have with us Josh Mers, who is the Democratic candidate for treasurer. Next week, it will be Robert Conway, who is the Democratic candidate for agricultural commissioner. On the 27th, we'll have Rocky Adkins, who is candidate for governor. And then on April 3rd, Jason Griffith, who is a Democratic candidate for Secretary of State. April 11th, we have Andrew English, who's the Republican candidate for Secretary of State. We don't have anyone scheduled for the 18th yet.
Right.
On the 24th, we have Heather French Henry, who is running for Democratic nomination for Secretary of State.
Right.
And we have tentatively scheduled Attorney General Andy Beshear after that, but we haven't quite nailed the date down yet.
Right. Right. Okay. And then we'll more than likely we're going to have some Friday shows too, because
Right.
because most of these candidates you mentioned are D's, and we have a few R's we want to try to get in.
Well, I like that though, Jim.
Somehow I thought you would.
You're going to have to get better. You're going to have to get busy with scheduling, kiddo.
So we'll have some Republicans as well, and
Yes.
like I said, we'll be doing Wednesdays and probably Fridays as well, as needed.
Right.
All right. Well, on our show today we have Josh Mers, and he is candidate for pardon me. There's so many candidates for Secretary of State on both sides.
Yeah,
State Treasurer.
I don't want anything with running against Miss America. So keep me in the treasurer's race.
Well, Josh, are you a political newcomer? Is this the first time you've thrown your hat in the ring or not?
No, I actually ran for, first of all, let me say thanks for having me today. I appreciate it, and it was a great drive over from Lexington today. I get to enjoy some of that weather. I ran for the State House in the 88th District, which is a suburban part of Lexington, and lost in the primary to a current state representative who flipped that seat, Sherilyn Stevenson. She did a fantastic job. She, really is going to be a phenomenal representative of our district, and so I'm glad and happy to call her my state rep.
All right. Well, very good. Very good. So, so you know a little bit about what it's like to campaign, and really, I'll tell you, I think from all the first-time candidates I've talked to, I think putting yourself out there and going door to door and campaigning, I mean, as a newcomer, it can be a little overwhelming, because you're really putting yourself out there, for public scrutiny.
You are. You're sacrificing, family time, personal time. You're going out there and you're opening your entire life's history up to whoever wants to use it. I'll say that, there's already been open records requests that have been done with the city of Lexington on my name, where I serve as the treasurer of the Human Rights Commission in Lexington. I know that some other candidates have had some open records requests already done on them, and so you're opening yourself up to that. But I mean, it's about answering a greater call for service, and that's what's important. And when somebody takes that step, we need to do everything we can to pat them on the back, to tell them good job, tell them keep it up, because it can be exhausting and overwhelming, especially for that first-time candidate.
Mm-hmm.
Josh, what prompted you to throw your hat in the ring for this race at this particular time?
And I've told folks that I never expected after losing that state house race that I was going to, jump back on the saddle so quickly. But I saw a real need that we were missing out, in our current treasurer, of having somebody that was serving as a true check on the administration. As I've tried to tell people, I try not to make the campaign about Matt Bevin. But I think, and I understand that there are some of your listeners that may believe that he's doing the right job, but I personally believe that he's sending Kentucky down the wrong path. And I believe that, our current treasurer is right there every step of the way and refusing to actually serve as that check on his administration. And that's unfortunate, because it's a disservice to Kentuckians all across our Commonwealth.
Can you think of can you cite a particular instance in which you think this has happened.
Well, and I'll be in Frankfurt later today to go stand shoulder to shoulder with Jefferson County public teachers who are over there protesting some of the changes right now. If you go back to 2018, the governor and the Republican legislature proposed some drastic changes to our pension system, and they did it at the 11th hour. They did it, the sewer bill. They did it behind closed doors. The treasurer is mandated by statute to sit on the Kentucky Teacher Retirement System Pension Board, which means that they have a very powerful voice on dealing with the teacher's retirement system. And if I had you guess how many words that our current treasurer said about those changes, if you said anything but zero, you'd be wrong. So here she sits on one of the most important boards dealing with our retirement systems, and refused to even offer any kind of dissension to the governor about those proposed changes. And that's a dereliction of her duties and responsibilities on that board.
What would you have done differently as if you're elected state treasurer? Because I know that right now the teachers are, I think they've been sensitized to any legislation dealing with the education system because changes can happen that negatively affect them. And so, and I know that teachers are being criticized for especially from Jefferson County, for going to Frankfurt, but at the same time, I understand the complaints, but you also have to understand that they're trying to protect their livelihood, and since they're covered by the union, they have the ability to go up and protest. Other teachers in other districts don't have that luxury.
Well, here's the thing to keep in mind, and there's kind of a couple of things to talk about in there. That, first of all, our teachers are using sick days.
Right.
To do these protests. Right. These are not, they're not allowed to strike in the state of Kentucky. Right. So just like, in, your listener's job, if you have sick days, that's what they're using to go to Frankfurt.
Sure.
And after having talked to, hundreds, even thousands of teachers over in Frankfurt last year and this year, it's not about the particular bills. There's so much of a disconnect and a confusion that folks are thinking that the teachers are protesting their pay, or they're protesting, a particular bill. What they want is a seat at the table. And that's one of the biggest, if I had if I could label a true negative or to talk about the governor, is that he has refused to have a seat at the table with our teachers. This affects them directly, and I would hope that when we talk about issues affecting coal country, and when we talk about issues affecting Jefferson County and the economy, that our government leaders bring the smartest people in the room. Have them sit down, have them talk about the effects, and it needs to be the same way with our teachers' retirement system and our public education funding. Mm-hmm. We're abysmal, and the folks on the one side want to claim that this is the highest per pupil level. When you factor in inflation, we're way behind where we should be. And that's what the teachers are over there doing. They're actually not even advocating for themselves. They're advocating for the future of public education in this state, and we need to be supporting them.
And when you talk about that money, that money being more, that's a greater share of local funds. The local taxpayers are paying much more into that, so the state is not providing more.
You're absolutely right, and I'll tell you that being in Fayette County, we just went through a property tax increase for the school property tax because the deficient budget that the state had left us with. Now, places like Jefferson and Fayette County, we have the tax base in property to be able to overcome those budget cuts. But what about a place like Owsley County, Kentucky, that's the poorest county in the state? How do they overcome it?
Well, they have a very difficult time. I mean, the school funds have been cut every single year since 2008, every single year.
Well, we're in, overall for budget, we're in our 20th round of budget cuts for the state, for the overall budget. And there comes a point we've got to understand that we cannot continue to cut ourselves to prosperity. That doesn't work.
Right.
I own a small business in Lexington, and if I cut every year, if I cut my expenses every year, and there are some cuts that need to be made, but if I cut every year across the board, eventually I'd be done. I'd be out of business.
Sure. And then again, when you're talking education, even though legislators may say, well, we're offering the highest level of per pupil funding, there are other cuts, there are other monies that are being taken away, money for transportation or
Yep.
some other things. And so it's still, overall the district costs are still rising, even without considering inflation.
The state has not bought textbooks for years, years. What are school districts supposed to do?
Well, I mean, they have to find other places to either raise the revenue or they have to cut. And so they end up, they don't hire new teachers, they don't hire new administrative personnel, they cut down the routes on their transportation. So you end up seeing kids on a bus for, 2 hours in the morning to get to school because they have less drivers, less buses.
And they allow less per classroom, and so teachers end up having to buy, teachers spend anywhere from $500 to $1,000 a year out of their own pocket,
Yeah.
many of them, in order to teach their classes.
So listen, I'm a product of public education. I went to Simpson County Schools down on the Tennessee state line where I grew up. I went to both Bluegrass Community and Technical School and the University of Kentucky. So I've been public education my entire way, and I've got two kids that are also in public education. I got a mother-in-law that's a teacher down in Ohio County. I believe in public education, and I believe that we have not only a responsibility, but a moral obligation to make sure that our public education is solidly funded, that those kids are taken care of, and that the teachers that we're entrusting to do that service are also taken care of.
All right, now in the role as state treasurer, explain to our listeners a little bit about the constitutional duties of the treasurer, and especially when dealing with, most people probably weren't aware that the state treasurer is also on the pension board too. So, what are the duties, and what other duties do you think the treasurer, the current treasurer, is not fulfilling to your satisfaction?
So I like to call it the box, if you will, and that there is a statutorily mandated box that is the role of the treasurer. And there are two different ways. First off, there is constitutionally mandated, and that's to provide a check on the administration.
Right.
You really have the treasurer is supposed to find fraud and corruption before it happens. The auditor is supposed to find it after it's happened. And so that's really the constitutional role. The statutorily mandated roles are, of course, balancing the checkbook. But anybody that comes to you that's running for treasurer that says, I'm going to balance the checkbook, that's not enough. That's a given. You should be able to balance the checkbook if you're running for treasurer. The second thing is unclaimed property. And unclaimed property, we've had these laws since the 1940s. And what that is it's generally non-tangible property. So it's not, autos, it's not real estate, it's stocks, it's savings bonds, it's,
Right.
Utility deposits.
Right.
After usually about 3 years, if a company has, tried to make an effort to get that utility deposit, we'll say, back to you, they have to give it to the state. And then it's the state's responsibility to hold it for you until you find it. We could do a better job with that. We could be more efficient and effective. And as opposed to having you go through the process of trying to find that we've got that money,
Right.
let's do a better job of going out and making sure you know that we have that money. Let's take the show on the road, if you will. The current treasurer does a good job of going over to the annex on a regular basis to set up during session to say this is unclaimed property. Let's do that, in places like Bardstown. Let's come from the treasurer's office over to Bardstown, and let's say, we're going to be set up and we're going to help you find out if we've got any of the unclaimed property. The third piece is called financial literacy. And, we are doing an awful job of preparing our youth to be adults. And this is not patronizing the youth of our state. But it's a reality that we're not teaching them how to balance a checkbook. We're not teaching them what credit scores are. We're not teaching them the finer details of insurance so that they can understand it and they're prepared to go out on the world on their own. Now, the legislature passed a bill last year that mandated financial literacy. But if you follow Frankfurt, it was kind of one of those feel-good bills that we put minimal effort into and minimal funding into, and it's just not going to have the effect that we want. We've got to be serious about financial literacy in this state, whether it's our youth, whether it's folks that are suffering from disabilities or living with disabilities, or whether it's our elder community. We can do a better job with that.
Well, I agree. I think that financial literacy, you don't want to learn it the way I did, the hard way.
Yeah.
When you get into credit card debt and suddenly you realize the minimum payment is never going to pay this thing off.
Yep.
And you've got it maxed out, and then you're trying to figure out how to keep all your other bills paid and get this paid, this credit card that's now your best friend, and get that debt out of your pocket.
Well, I'll tell you, I remember when I came to UK, I was 1 week over 18. So I just had my 18th birthday, and it used to be, and they've changed this law now, but walking on UK's campus, there was a table right outside Whitehall Classroom Building. Sign up for the credit card, get a free Wildcats t-shirt.
Sure.
And sure enough, I did. I had, no job. I mean, I was a college student at that point. I wasn't working yet. I had no money. I think I barely had a checking account at that point. And they gave me my first credit card. And I remember I, of course, like any 18-year-old, had no idea how to manage it. And I ran it up, and I got a nice little lecture from my dad about credit cards. But we can do better than that. We can
Sure.
prepare kids to be able to deal with those situations.
Right. And that when I was at the Western, I was shocked by every bulletin board in the entryway of every campus building had little pockets full of folders. Get your credit card today. Not to mention the tables where you could get a Western Kentucky towel or a pitcher or a 32-ounce mug, with the Western's logo on it for applying for a credit card.
Yep.
And they gave them away like candy. And I worked at the College Heights Herald, the campus newspaper, and I think just about everybody on the staff had a credit card, and most of them were maxed out.
Mm-hmm.
Because and at that time the credit limit for a student was about $1,000.
Yeah.
And that seemed like a great deal of money. And once you had that card maxed out, it seemed like a whole lot of money. It seemed like
And it got even bigger.
Yep.
because it seemed like it was going to take $10,000 to get the thing paid off.
Yeah.
But again, I think financial literacy, you and I both entered into that situation without a clue about the right way to manage credit and manage money.
You're absolutely right, and it's just a matter of that we can do better.
Yes.
And they've made, like I said, with that piece of legislation, they made a good step in the right direction. Now let's fund it. Let's make sure that it's part of our public education now, which of course is, we have an issue with funding, but let's actually do it. The other part that falls within the box is, of course, the boards and commissions that the treasurer sits on. And everybody that runs for treasurer since the dawn of time likes to talk about the boards and commissions, and they are important. We talked about the KTRS board, which is the teachers' pensions. I also sit on the lottery board, the Higher Education Authority board, and then the one that I think affords a great deal of influence or ability to affect change is the State Investment Commission, where you have a voice in a lot of the economic development of the state, and so I think you can play a very pivotal role. And now it doesn't fall within the actual State Investment Commission, but you may recall, and you asked for a specific example of things that I think that the treasurer has been derelict on. We gave $15 million, or the governor gave $15 million of Kentucky's taxpayer money to Brady Industries.
Yes.
And we can't even look at the books.
Right.
We own $15 million of that company as taxpayers, and we can't look at it. And again, the treasurer, who should be advocating for economics in the state and economic development
And transparency.
hadn't said a word about it. I love what the state of Ohio has done with their Treasury's office. They call it the Ohio checkbook, and it is as open and transparent as you can be. You can see every expenditure. You can see every, income item, credits and debits that are coming into the state of Ohio, and you can see it in almost real time. And we can achieve that. We can do a better job of being open and transparent, especially when it deals with something like $15 million of Kentucky's taxpayer money.
When Chris Tobey was here, he was talking about the some investments that the pensions have made that he thought were questionable, and some of those are in the same category. The agreements were made, the investments were made, but you can't look at the contracts. You can't examine anything about it, really, any of the true details about those investments.
And I mean, let's say that you opened a bank account here in Bardstown, and you deposited money into it, and the bank, just decided that they were going to, spend it however they wanted, but you can't find out where they're spending it. You can't find out what they're doing with your money.
Sure.
Well, that's not the way it's meant to be. This is your money, and that $15 million, and then the pension investments, that is Kentucky taxpayer money.
Sure.
And we've got to do a better job of opening. There's a bill right now that they kicked around that actually seeks to limit the open records, that seeks to sunset
Right.
That's the wrong approach. We don't need to be going backwards when it comes to transparency. We need to be making sure that we are as transparent as we can be.
You know, when you mentioned this Brady Industries, I mean, this is the thing that's really bugged me ever since I first heard of it. I mean, looking at the Kentucky Constitution, doesn't it say that we can invest in corporations? I mean, doesn't it say something like that?
Yeah, I mean, we're not, the idea is that we're not supposed to just hand cash over to a corporate entity. We're not
Right.
supposed to just hand cash
Right.
over and buy stock. And that's really what we've done is we've bought
But that's
stock.
what we're doing.
And, I mean, the governor has found a way to skirt that, and that's unfortunate. It's another time when the constitutional officers should be speaking out and saying this isn't right. Typically what we do is what's called tax expenditures, where we offer tax incentives or, we try to incentivize companies.
But
And
that's a different thing.
it is different, but I think it falls into the overall category of we've got to do better with those economic investments. We give away $13 billion a year in tax expenditures, and sometimes it works. In the past, we have been very successful, and before we came on, we were talking about the automotive industry. Martha Lane Collins
Yes.
gave the farm to Toyota.
Right.
I mean, she did everything she could to get Toyota to open that facility in Scott County. And they did, and with it has come a major influx of automotive suppliers in communities all around central Kentucky that supply that. So we can do a better job at how we invest the taxpayer's dollar. We need to go through those $13 billion. We need to find the areas that are not giving us an actual economic development and get rid of them. And then we need to find the ones that are truly providing economic development to our communities, because we've got communities all across the state, whether it's the west end of Louisville or whether it's the reaches of southeastern Kentucky where coal has left its mark. They're being left behind. They're being forgotten about. And we can use those tax expenditures. We can use the State Investment Commission. We can use the economic investments of the state to try to help develop those communities and get them ready for new economies.
All right, we need to stop and take a commercial break. Josh, Margie and I will be back with our special guest, Treasurer candidate Josh Mers, after these messages. Stay tuned, everybody.
Welcome back to the Bradford and Brooks Show, live on WBRT 97.1 FM and 1320 AM. Also, streaming live at WBRTcountry.com.
All right, you're back with Bradford and Brooks, Jim Brooks and Margie Bradford, and we'll be here to the top of the hour. And then you can stay tuned for the best local news after the top of the hour. And also want to congratulate the Bethlehem Banshees. They had an excellent send-off and a police escort out of town yesterday when they hit the road for the Sweet 16 that's hosted for the first time ever at Rupp Arena. We're very proud of the Banshees for their all the hard work they've done and to earn a spot in the Sweet 16. The Banshees do play today. Their tip-off time, I think, is 1 o'clock, but WBRT will have Darren George and Hal Good at the courtside, and coverage begins at 12:30 today. If you want to catch the Banshees pregame and then the broadcast of the game, which let's see, the Banshees. Look at my notes here. Pardon me. The Banshees are playing against. Was it Scott County? Just a second here, folks. The Banshees will tip off. Oh, okay. They'll tip off against Owensboro Catholic at 1:30 this afternoon. And the winner of that game will play the winner of the Knott County-Scott County game on Friday. So good luck to the Bethlehem Banshees and their coach. And last night at the City Council meeting, Bethlehem Principal Tom Hamilton and Athletic Director Keith Graham attended, and they the mayor proclaimed today Bethlehem Banshee Day in their honor. So anyway, Greg, good luck to the team, and you can catch live coverage of the Banshees at the Sweet 16 here at 12:30 on WBRT. All right, we are joined in the studio by Josh Mers, who is a Democratic candidate in the May primary for state treasurer. And we've had a good conversation with Josh and about his thoughts about that. And I'll Margie, I'll turn it back over to you.
All right, Josh, tell us about your background, not only your professional background, but your personal background.
Well, so I'll tell you that I'm originally from Franklin, Kentucky, which is down on the Tennessee state line, and so grew up there, went to Franklin Simpson schools, was the child of two factory workers that, we kind of, and let me preface this, that we have a very bad problem in the Democratic Party of often doing this rags to riches story and saying that, I started off at the bottom, and now through all this hard work and through determination, look at me, look at what I've achieved. And the reality is that most Kentuckians don't have that same story. Sure, they started off possibly at the bottom, or they started off in working families, working class neighborhoods, and maybe they got a little bit better. But they don't achieve this great success, and that's really where my story is. I grew up to two working families, working parents that worked on assembly lines their entire 30-year career. They tried to do everything they could to give my older brother and I as many opportunities as possible. And through that, I got to go to public school. I ended up going to the University of Kentucky in Lexington, and that's what took me from South Central Kentucky to Lexington. And I was only able to do that because, I had a minimal amount of scholarships that were through the state. I had a lot of student loans, which at 37 years old, I'm still paying on those student loans. And then when I got to college, after a couple of weeks of being there, I went to work for UPS in Lexington. And if you know anything about UPS, day one, when you start working at UPS, you immediately become a member of the Teamsters. And so I became a Teamsters, and part of that was a lot of educational matching, tuition matching that came from it. So, through those three things, I was able to go to college, and since then, set up own a small insurance and financial services agency in Lexington that affords me the ability to come over to places like Bardstown today and have a conversation with you all. But it was a background that I think or a life story that is very similar to what most people in Kentucky have, and that's I'm proud of it. I'm proud of the roots that I've got, and proud of what my parents provided for me, and where I'm at, and I look forward to what I'm able to do for my kids.
Right. Well, I think it's natural as a parent, and you really don't understand this till you become a parent, that you want to provide the best opportunity in life you can for your own kids. Mm-hmm. That kind of becomes job one. So anyway, your kids are fairly young still?
So I've got an 11-year-old and a 6-year-old, and I'll tell you that they came to us through the foster care system. Mm-hmm. Which I'm going to plug this real quick, because one of the things I've been very active in is trying to advocate for foster kids and for foster parents. Mm-hmm. We've got 8,000 kids in the state of Kentucky that are in out-of-home care. Right. Fostering is a challenging, sometimes heartbreaking system to be a part of for both the parents and the kids. But it's important that we try to find safe, secure, and loving homes, whether temporary or permanent, for these kids.
Well, thank you for your service, because that is such an important role to play in a child's life.
It is, and I mean, it is not all challenge and heartbreak. Mm-hmm. There are so many rewarding moments that come from it, and sometimes that rewarding moment is seeing that child reunified with their both parents, mm-hmm. Because that means that parent has, the system has been there for the parent in order to get them back on the right track, and it's important. I'll piggyback off that. When you talk about sort of my background right now, what I'm doing, I've been I like to call it a social and economic community advocate for the city of Lexington and for Central Kentucky, and that's worked with, working for folks that, their voices have been, trampled on or left behind by others. And working for folks that are, being left behind in the divide, because we have a divide, in Fayette County between, if you were born in one zip code in the city to another zip code, there's a divide in education, there's a divide in economic status, there's a divide in technology. And then it is absolutely, amplified if you talk about the divide between different parts of this state. Again, I mentioned Owsley County is the poorest county in the state of Kentucky. It's the fourth poorest per capita in the entire country. Imagine the divide that exists between Owsley County and Oldham County, which is rated the wealthiest per capita county in the state of Kentucky. The divide is real. And that's where we go back to stuff like public education, that it is the great equalizer.
Sure.
If we fully fund it and we provide a good system, it's what lifts kids out of those divides and gives them an opportunity. Not every kid is going to, realize that opportunity or is going to, take that opportunity and run with it. But it gives them the chance. And that's what's important. That's what we've got to do, is give folks the chance to escape those divides.
Well, I think Margie, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the whole intent and purpose of the Kentucky Education Reform Act was to try to equalize the education.
Equalize education funding,
Right.
because that was the basis of the suit brought by those 28 school superintendents
Right.
to challenge the funding mechanism.
So anyway, and I think we've reaped the benefits of that. Is, of course, that education reform has evolved considerably over the years.
Well, it has. That started in 1990, and we were really going full force there for about 10 years on that. And but it started to fall back as the state has cut funds and cut funds and cut funds.
Well, and that's, I was a direct recipient. I graduated high school in 1999, so I was a direct recipient of the reforms that came out of
Yes.
CARA. The problem is that what we're doing right now is we're dismantling piece by piece those
it
great
is.
reforms that we did.
Absolutely.
And we're doing it through funding. You're right. It was designed to try to equalize, all of the school districts or the funding. But again, you go back to that, if you cut the transportation budget by 30-40% for a school, who can make it up?
Right.
It's those counties that are more advantaged. They
Right.
can make up the difference. And
Yeah.
so we're going right back to where we were pre-1990, and it's going to be a disaster for our rural schools.
Right. And if you don't have the money to make that up, then you end up not buying buses or whatever for another year. Your bus fleet gets older, less reliable. And so in the worst case scenario, that could be hazardous to the kids you're trying to transport.
Exactly. And there's already at least one independent school district who's closed its doors. So it's going to happen to more schools because they simply are not able to afford what it takes to keep going and provide a quality education.
Well, Josh, tell us a little bit about, and you're in insurance and financial services. What experience and knowledge from that business experience of yours, what's that bring to the table for you as a treasurer, as a candidate for state treasurer?
Well, I think it's, there are multiple aspects of what it brings. First of all, we talked about that, the balancing the checkbook. If that's the only thing that somebody's coming with you, then they're missing the point of the office. But the reality is that I said you should already have that ability. Owning a small business, whether, whatever kind it is, you're managing the bottom line, you're signing the checks, you're dealing with cuts, you're dealing with, expenditures. And you get pretty good at that. From a financial standpoint, what it also does is, I work with, hundreds of individuals, throughout the month. Throughout a given month, I'll work with 100, or more different individuals and see their experience and see what they're going through and hear from them. And I think that's important that our statewide officers, realize that it is not, we're not a statewide office for a place like California or New York where you're on this pedestal that's out there somewhere. You're a regular person that lives that goes to the grocery store in the community, and you should be able to have a connection to that regular experience of somebody that's living in your community.
Well, Josh, as if elected state treasurer, what would you do different in as far as financial literacy go? What would you do to assist an effort to make our young people more aware of traps like getting a credit card when you're 18?
Well, I mean, I think it's part of, you see that, for example, the Secretary of State will do these bulletins or these campaigns. The Attorney General will do these bulletins or these campaigns about a particular issue. And I think that's what we can do. I think on top of that, the Treasurer needs to be playing a pivotal part with with the Department of Education or the Cabinet for Education, talking about how we can shape that financial literacy program. And then the other thing is I'll tell folks that the treasurer is a statewide official, and they should be going out and selling these programs. And when I say selling, I'm not talking about trying to collect money. I'm saying going out and making sure that the message is being heard of why financial literacy is important. Let's get the communities to buy in on it. And then, not only do we have, a teacher trying to teach financial literacy, we've got the local bank president in that rural community that's coming in and helping to do that, or providing some extra resources to make up for where we're not getting the funding out of Frankfurt.
Well, I tell you, I like that approach very much, because school districts have so many duties, so many subjects that they have to teach, and they are held accountable for the ones which count on the test. They are not held accountable for the ones that do not appear on the test. It doesn't mean that they don't try to do them, but it's just that the stakes are so high for those school districts to be able to do what they're supposed to do with the subjects that they are provided money for. When you have an unfunded mandate like teaching literacy, that just adds to their plate full of things that they have to do, but yet gives them no resources with which to do it, which means either taking part of one teacher's time away from their original subject to do it. So I really like the idea of the office of the treasurer coming in and going out to the counties and having a program in each one of those counties.
The challenge to the treasurer's office is that it is the smallest budget-wise of any of the statewide officials, but that's because the treasurer has allowed that office to be cut and cut and cut. So it makes it difficult. But when it's this important, you find a way. And that's what the treasurer's got to do. You've got to get outside that office in Frankfurt. You've got to, get outside of that bubble and be in the communities and make sure that the message is out there. Make sure that, people are buying into why financial literacy is important.
Well, and I think any role the state treasurer could play, I think your local, bank presidents or other folks who are, adept in financial services would be happy to assist.
Maybe even help co-sponsor.
Sure. So I think that could be a beautiful friendship,
I
to
think
assist
so.
to assist in financial.
Well, I believe that the treasurer should have an amazing, fruitful working relationship with the Kentucky Bankers Association, because that is a great resource that covers the entire state that would help the treasurer, get that message out there and find those extra resources that we need.
Right. Anything else on your punch list of things you think that you don't see being done to your satisfaction as far as state treasurer position goes?
Well, I'll tell you that, we talked about earlier about the box of the mandated duties. And there are some folks out there that believe that the treasurer should stay within that box and should never step outside of it. And I happen to be of the camp that disagrees with that. We've had strong treasurers in the past that have done some great work. The one that, comes to mind, most easily for me is Jonathan Miller, who did the Cradle to College initiative.
Oh, that was wonderful. I have two grandchildren who are taking advantage, whose parents have taken advantage of that and had their college education paid for.
And that was an example of a treasurer stepping outside that box, advocating for an issue, seeing it through, getting it through the legislature, getting the governor's signature, and then going out and selling that program. And I think that that's what we need. You've got the pulpit of a statewide office. There are only 6 other people besides the treasurer, not counting the federal offices, that have a statewide constitutional pulpit. Use it. use it and go out and be an advocate. I believe that the treasurer should be our chief economic ambassador for the state of Kentucky. They should be advocating for the taxpayer, and by that I mean, let's talk about new sources of revenue. Let's find ways, as we mentioned, the 20th round of budget cuts, let's find ways to make smart and sensible budget cuts that aren't going to hurt, the people of Kentucky. And then let's have the conversations about fair and equitable tax reform. And that's not raising taxes. That's talking about how we handle those tax expenditures. That's how we handle the way we're taxing stuff. Because we have got to quit trying to balance the budget on the backs of our working families and our already impoverished Kentuckians. We can't do it that way. We can't keep looking at 21st century problems and trying to manage them with solutions from the 1980s. And again, the treasurer's got to get outside that office and be that ambassador for the Kentucky taxpayer.
Well, Josh, since you brought up tax reform, the General Assembly has been moving. They cut, I think last year, cut tax rates and moving more towards consumption tax by applying the sales tax to more goods and services. What's your thoughts on that, the direction, taking that direction, going? Of course, Tennessee has a much higher consumption tax, but no income tax. What are your thoughts on that, taking that direction?
So first, we have to. You see Tennessee brought up into this conversation an awful lot, and I want to address that first. That Tennessee has, through Nashville, through Gatlinburg, Pigeon Forge, they have a much higher rate of tourism than we do.
Right.
Same with Florida. Florida does not have an income tax, but has a very high sales tax.
Right.
Because those states are banking on the tourists. They're trying to balance their budget on people that are coming to visit their state. We don't have the kind of rate of tourism that those states do. So that is not a fair example.
Right.
Or a comparison. What happened last year was 95% of Kentuckians were told they got a tax reduction. Because of the way the changes to our sales tax, our consumption tax, they actually got a tax raise. 95% of Kentuckians will pay more in taxes because of what they did last year. And I find it very interesting that veterinary services is an example, that small dogs and cats, small animals, were taxed. Right. And I love the horse industry. I'm from Lexington. I love the horse industry. It's a vital part to our state. But it's interesting that horses were not taxed. Who is more likely to own a horse? Our wealthier Kentuckians.
Sure.
Who's more likely to own a dog? Your average person owns a dog. Right. And that's where the tax went. So I think that speaks to what they did with that tax plan, is that it was not designed to truly bolster Kentucky's tax system and to reform it. It was designed to shift the burden of the tax from our wealthiest Kentuckians to our working families. And that's unacceptable to me.
All right, we need to take another quick commercial break, and we'll come back and wrap up the show right after that. Stay tuned. All right, you're back with Bradford and Brooks. We've got about a minute and a half left in today's show, and our guest has been Josh Mears, who's the Democratic candidate seeking the nomination for Kentucky State Treasurer, which is one of how many constitutional offices outside the lieutenant governors?
So you got six.
Six,
okay. And then the seventh is the lieutenant governor.
Right. Right. Well, Josh, tell us a little bit about if our listeners want to find out a little more about you and your campaign, how can they get that information?
Well, I'll tell you, I tried to make it as simple as possible. The website is joshmers.com. That's JOSHMERS.com. You can also find me on Facebook and Twitter at Josh Mers, the number 4, KY. I look forward to reaching out. I look forward to hearing from folks. I'll tell you, I'm excited about the opportunities that we've got with this office and for 2019. And I think we're in for a big year here in Kentucky.
All right, sir. Well, thank you for coming in today. It's been a pleasure to have you on.
Thank you all. I've really enjoyed it.
Thank you, Josh.
All right. Well, for our listeners, stay tuned. At news at the top of the hour, and at 12:30, we'll begin our broadcast live from Rupp Arena with the girls' Sweet 16 basketball and live coverage of the Bethlehem Banshees basketball game. Everybody, thank you for listening, and we'll be back next Wednesday with another candidate for office, and we'll update our schedule then. So everybody have a great week, and we'll see you then.